True Crime. I'm Manny Rodriguez. In today's episode, we are continuing the coverage of Valerie Tindall, teenager who went missing only to later be found that her neighbor and boss, who is also her boss, would be the one arrested for her murder. Again, first, missing. And so as we continue to cover this, more continues to come out. And so now I want to share with you the full charging documents against Patrick A. Scott and share with you whatever bit of information I had not already shared with you. This is an ongoing case, so it's almost like every day something is coming out. And so let's go ahead and dive into what we know at this time. Rest in peace to Valerie Tindall, taken from this world way too soon. Be right back. On June 7th of 2023, Valerie Tindall, born August 29th, 2005, young, had so much promise, so much future, already was accepted into colleges, and she wanted to pursue being a veterinarian. She tells her parents that she is leaving home and she is going to go over to work. Her work is where her neighbor, identified as Patrick A. Scott, he is said to own this lawn mowing business, and she worked for him. He was additionally found to live right behind her residence at the address of 2394 North Oak Street in Arlington. And so I want to share with you a little of what we know. Valerie Tindall, she lived right there at 2368 North 700. Patrick Scott, he lived right there at 2394 Oak Street. As you can see, they're practically neighbors. They live right next to each other. And he owns a lawn mowing business that she would work there over the summer to earn some extra cash. Now, Valerie, she leaves her home and she goes to Shelbyville, in her Honda Accord. Shelbyville is not far at all from where she's at. And in Shelbyville, I thought I actually had another, I missed one. Shelbyville, that is where, poopies, I had Shelbyville High School up here. So Shelbyville High School is where she was going to, and across the street are some apartments that are located across from Shelbyville High School. That's where she met up with Patrick Scott. And so Patrick Scott, he proceeded to drive Tindall back to his residence located at 2394. That's his home. And he did this right on that date, June 7th. Again, he says he didn't see her on that day originally. And so they go back to his place on that date. And they get back to his home around 12:59 p.m. This time is very significant to other activities that went on around this time that also pointed to his guilt. Now, Valerie, she was never seen from or heard from after this date, and her last known social media activity was right around this area, the 1300 block North 725, and you can see how far it is from the 2394. So the GPS hit on this location. And so it shows that she was on her phone around this activity, at least showing her last known social media activity was around this time at 12:53 p.m. Now again, she arrives at his home at 12:59, as you can see right shortly. So it even kind of tells you the direction they were headed in on their way to get to his home right around that 12:59 p.m. So again, this is approximate location and time on where this stuff is hit, but that is his home. And so right at 12:53 p.m., that's when her phone hits on this location, meaning that they're in process of getting there together. And so during the early stages of this investigation, Patrick Scott, he did speak to the investigators and, in trying to figure out what exactly happened to her. So he's going to be one of the people that they speak to. And so during these early stages of this investigation, Patrick Scott, he was spoken to in regards to assisting and possibly knowing where Tindall was possibly located. As this investigation continued, they realized Scott actually lied to them. He was not being fully truthful about his whereabouts and about her whereabouts. You see, Scott initially tells law enforcement and tells Tindall's family that he had not seen Tindall, nor had she worked for him on June 7th. When he was later confronted with evidence to prove otherwise, that's when he changes his story, and he advises that he had actually driven Tindall to meet some boy that he did not know, and so that he tells them he dropped her off with some boy in Homer, Indiana. Now, on another date, Mr. Scott, he tells law enforcement that he brought Tindall all the way back to his residence and he returned to work. He claimed that on this date, when he returned, Tindall was gone. That was another one of his lies. Scott continuously made reference to believing that Tindall, she must have run away. By all means, she had to have run away. That's what he was telling investigation, and that is not all he would tell them. He even made reference to her father's abusive behaviors towards her, trying to put the focus towards her dad. Now, multiple search warrants were then executed on any electronic devices in this investigation, and it was learned that based on those electronic devices, Scott returned to his residence at approximately 12:59 p.m. on June 7th with Valerie Tindall. So his lies continue to start cracking as he continues to spread the lies. And Scott, he made, which was very odd, he made some weird movements that day involving, not searching the internet like he normally does, and what appears to be that he deactivated a lot of the apps on his phone. Why would he do that? But something that was going on in the background of his phone, the Apple Health app, it actually continued operating. So remember, he gets home at 12:59 approximately with Valerie. The Apple Health app, was operating in the background, and the app began recording significant health activities, meaning like it turned on because, hey, it looks like you're actually doing something very physical at approximately 1:35 p.m. These activities, they are definitely significant enough to activate this in the background of his phone. Obviously, his heart was going faster. Activity was showing that you are working out. We are going to start running things. My wife has an iPhone. She has apps, and I see how that thing can work along with her phone or her watch that gives her tracking abilities too. And so when you put two and two together at 12:59 on June 7th, and then 1:35, the app begins recording significant health activities. He's obviously doing something at this time to Valerie. And the investigators, they additionally discovered through their investigation that Scott had returned to where her vehicle was at. You see, that was another key piece of evidence in this case. You see, he returns to where Tindall's vehicle was originally parked, again, in the apartment, and he moves it to another location in what appears to be an attempt to hide the vehicle. He backs the vehicle into a parking lot with other broken down vehicles, and the license plates and the keys were then removed from the vehicle, trying to make it look suspicious. It was later learned that night of her disappearance on June 7th, Patrick Scott and his wife went to the Tindall's residence in an attempt to support the Tindall family. This was in the evening hours of June 7th. That is, they have all that. That was proven. On the date of October 11th, 2023, that's when cadaver dogs were placed on a property located directly to the east of Scott's residence. And Mr. Scott, he is known to have a close relationship. The family is said to have trusted him with her. Now, the family right now is taking a lot of heat because of that trust. They felt like he was her boss. But they started getting some red flags when all of a sudden she was put on his phone activities, like he was paying for her phone bill. That raised a red flag. And so on October 11th, cadaver dogs were placed on his property located directly to the east of his residence. Now, this was completed under the property owner consent. That was, so let me correct myself real quick, because I just mistakenly said that it was his residence. It's east of his residence. The owner of that property did give consent to the authorities to go ahead and do their search. And so this was completed under the property owner consent, and it was completed due to a pond that was located on the property with close proximity to the last known location of Tindall. And so on this date, 4 separate cadaver dogs gave a positive indication to the presence of human decomposition on the pond. And so they requested assistance in searching this pond from the Indiana State Police dive team, who then completed a dive on the pond, confirming that nope, there are no one located in this pond. But on a later date, a sonar was then placed on the pond, which also said nothing was located in this pond. But it doesn't end there. When speaking with the handlers who had the cadaver dogs, they learned that the water is known to hold odor. And so the detective was advised that it is possible that this could be associated with water runoff, or could just be the scent from another location that the wind is carrying and the water is maintaining the odor. It should also be noted, according to these charging documents, that the wind was actually carrying. It was coming from the direction of Patrick Scott's other property that was located at 2366 North Oak Street. You see, that's where that odor could have possibly been coming from, because that's where she would be located. Again, that is very, very close to where he lived, because he lived at 2394 North Oak Street. Okay. And so this property is at literally right down the road at 2366 North Oak Street. And so investigators, they additionally requested a topography study to be conducted, which determined that it is possible that the water runoff from Scott's property could drain into that pond. And so they continued doing their investigation into all of this. And so in obtaining further information from the applications that Scott was found to utilize, they were able to determine the day after Tindall went missing, Scott travels to the Home Depot. And you can see here the Home Depot in Greenfield, Indiana. He makes a purchase of 4 2x4s and 2 sheets of 4x4 OSB, which OSB is some type of board used to make this box. And so on October 12th, they do a flyover with a drone that was completed of Scott's property. They realize that they can see on Scott's 2 properties multiple areas of obvious ground disturbance, like some digging, like something was going on. And so after receiving this information with the other information obtained in the investigation, it was then determined that investigators would then apply for a search warrant in order to search this property, to search for human remains as well as other items that were related to this investigation. And so fast forward to just a week and a half ago, they're doing all their investigation around this property. Okay, and then on the date of November 27th, multiple probable cause affidavits were submitted to Judge Hill of Rush Superior Court requesting multiple search warrants, including for the search of Patrick Scott's properties. And so then, the day later, officers from multiple agencies converged on the properties located at both 2394 and 2366 North Oak Street, Arlington, for the execution of these search warrants. And so that's how we find out that they at the property located at the 2366 North Oak Street, officers, they observed a large dirt pile with miscellaneous debris around it and on it. And during this time, this area became a focus because of the large dirt mound and hole observed around this whole everything. This area began being dug by utilizing shovels, during which time officers discovered a large homemade box made out of the OSB and 2x4s. This box was found to be wrapped in a tarp and was discovered to be greater than 5 feet long. And when they opened this box, it was discovered that it contained miscellaneous paperwork as well as VHS tapes. Now, VHS tapes, I find that very odd because, it's hard to even find these VHS tapes. Was that other crimes that could be in his possession? We're talking VHS tapes. My wife has VHS tapes from stuff she recorded in the 90s. This young girl was born in 2005, so these VHS tapes most likely would be before 2005. I don't remember the last time I bought a VHS tape. I know that I personally, unless I have some movie that I'm holding on to because it's valuable, who has VHS tapes? To me, that's going to show something that we don't even know about yet. Because that's when they find, you gotta stop and think about what those VHS tapes will contain. Why would he hide VHS tapes? You remember those things? And so officers, they continue digging this area utilizing different equipment. And during this time, a second box was revealed. When this box was first discovered, an odor came from this box that it was definitely, according to the investigators, that was commonly associated with decomposition. And so this box, also discovered to be wrapped in a tarp, was a long rectangular box. Officers continued to dig this box out, eventually removing the first box. And so they removed this box, and it was found to be constructed with OSB and 2x4s that strikingly matched the first box. This box, however, was wrapped multiple times and contained a strong odor of decomposition. Additionally observed on this box was duct taped in the seam. And so they open this box, and they notice that there's a black plastic wrap that was discovered as well. Why would there be that? And so there was this box, something wrapped in this black plastic was discovered. And the detective instantly observed this object to be the size of a human and instantly detected the odor of decomposition. The body had been there for months, right? Because we know that according to him, she was killed on June 7th, also the day that she is said to have disappeared. And so this plastic was slowly opened, knowing that it was taped and wrapped multiple times around this box. And upon opening this plastic, human remains were discovered inside the box. Rest in peace, Valerie. And the detective observed orange fingernails on these human remains instantly, and they knew that the last photo that was taken showed her with orange fingernail tips. And so upon reviewing social media, they were able to determine that that photo with Tindall that on June 7th she had was matching the colored fingernails of that which he observed the remains to have. That's how they knew that this is Valerie Tindall, who had been missing. And now we know the person that was starting to become high on everyone's suspect list, because everyone knew he was the last person to be seen with her. And so that's why it becomes heartbreaking that anyone can do this to this wonderful human being who had so much life to live and give. And so now we'll never know what tomorrow would have brought for this young girl. And so they contacted the Rush County coroner, right, at approximately 4:45 p.m. that day, notifying her of this discovery, at which time the coroner advised that she would be there shortly. It was determined that Patrick Scott would be taken into custody for investigation now. And so officers from the FBI and Shelby County Sheriff's Office, they were sitting surveillance on Scott's residence there. And so they were notified a short time later that Scott was in custody, at which time the U.S. Marshal would then talk to him along with an FBI special agent. And they went and they located and they took him into custody of, Scott. No problem. He gives up. He's like, oh, you want me in custody? No problem. He goes. And so Linda Scott, the wife, was also at the residence at the time that he was taken into custody. And she was also transported by law enforcement to the Rush County Sheriff's Department in regards to this investigation. We don't know her side of anything yet. So Scott himself was transported back to the Rush County Sheriff's Department, and he was then interviewed. And prior to speaking with Scott, he was advised of his Miranda warning, of course, and he understood his rights, is what he would say. And during the interview, he admitted to killing Valerie Tindall on the date of June 7, 2023 at his residence. And during the interview, he advised the following in regards to the investigation. He advised that, he says, when asked what happened to Valerie, and you got to also take it with a grain of salt, because now he knows he's in trouble. How much is he going to give up in reference to this? And so he says that Valerie got carried away. I don't believe him. He says that Scott advised Tindall that, she tried to blackmail him into buying her a car. And he says that Tindall thought she was going to seduce him and it wasn't going to happen. Scott advised Tindall got carried away. And he says that Linda doesn't know about it and advised no one does, not even his granddaughter. And he says that Tindall tried to seduce him and he wasn't going to have it. And he asked, the detective asked Scott what he did to Tindall, and he advised he strangled her with a belt. Scott advised that he then moved Tindall into the office until the next day. That's what he says in reference. So he leaves her in the office till the next day before he then goes off to Home Depot. And so he leaves her there to the next day, and he says, Scott advised that the belt is gone. He doesn't know what happened. He says when he got home the next day, he made that box, and he said the hole was already dug, but advised it wasn't dug for that. It was dug for concrete. And when the detective asked Scott what the other box was for, he advised to put SHIT in. And he says that they were by his bedroom when he strangles her. Scott denied him and Tindall being in a sexual relationship, and he advised that Tindall was trying to come onto him, and Scott advised that he was going to tell people he was making moves on her. That's what Tindall said. He was going to tell people, she was going to tell people. That's what he said. And then he says, I wasn't going to have it. And that's when he says things got out of hand. And he says that the belt was his, and it was the one he was wearing at that time. And he says that he was fighting Tindall off, and he took it off, he took it and threw it around her. And he says Tindall had tried to take her clothes off, and he wasn't going to do it. He says that Tindall had begins pushing and shoving him. And Scott advised that he took his belt off and advised, I put it around her neck and I held on to it until she quit. And he says, the detective says to Scott what was going through his head at the time. And he says he didn't know what to do with her, and he was trying to figure out what to do with her. And he says he held the belt on her until she quit moving. And when the detective asked if he knew she was dead, and he advised, I pretty much figured so. And he says the next day he builds the box in the backyard. And he says that he put Tindall in it the same day he built it. And he says that he built the box the day after Tindall went missing, which would have been June 8th. Scott initially says he already had the lumber for the box, and he denied going to get lumber, and he advised he always have scrap lumber laying around. And the detectives tell Scott of his purchase at Home Depot that next day on June 8th, and he says, maybe I did. That's what this creep says. Maybe I did. And when the detective asks if he remembers doing that, he says, I could have. And so Scott, he confirms that he went to mow the cemetery on June 8th. And he says during that time, Tindall was in the office and advised he was the only person to have access in the office. Again, she was not alive in that office. And when the detective asked Scott when he got home on that date if anyone was home, he says no. Detective asked Scott if anyone was home on the 7th, and he says, someone. This part in the charging document was kind of blank, so I really don't know, but he advised something. When the detective asked if he heard it, and Scott says no. So who could he have been? That all I knew was a wife was living there and a granddaughter was living there. And he says that person never came down there. So Scott confirms that he drug Tindall into the office and claimed that she had all of her clothing on. And when the detective asked if she was clothed when he put her in the box, it was, in which he says she was. And so when asked, what did Tindall have to say about the car, Scott says when her car broke down, if her dad couldn't get it running, he would help her get another car. However, it would be a cheap car. And he says that wasn't suiting her and she was wanting a new car. Let's be very straight. It is known that he had been spending money on her, not only on the phone. There's been other instances. This car thing, to me, there is some legitimacy behind it. But I'm going to tell you my speculation. Maybe I shouldn't do this. I believe he came on to her. That was going to ruin everything because she did not want to, or there's going to be more to this. I'm pretty sure there's going to be more to this, but it's hard for me to buy what he's saying. Number one, anyone who's capable of taking someone else's life, how could you really believe anything they say unless they're trying to come clean? And nowhere do I feel he wants to get something off of his chest. He is trying to minimize what role he really had in all of this. I truly believe that. And so, I don't believe that she did have car problems. I do believe that she might have been struggling with the car, but a Honda Accord, we do know that those things last a lifetime pretty much. I'm exaggerating, but they last some of those things that go 150, 200,000 miles, right? So we don't really know to the extent of all of this. We are going to continue to find out more. I'm sure about that. But he says that, he was going to get her a cheap car. That didn't fit her need. She wanted more. I'm not buying all of that. Maybe there's a little bit of truth. I don't know. But when the detective asked Mr. Scott, where's that belt that you used? He says he didn't remember, but he did wear it after he committed this heinous crime. And so he admits to leaving her in the office as the family went about their evening. Again, that same evening, while she's in his office, he goes over to the family's home to try to offer some consoling of them, to be the I'm sorry you're going through this, but he never helps find her. He never helps find the missing child. He is as guilty as there is 24 hours in a day. I know I shouldn't say that, but some things are so obvious. And since he already confessed, that gives me a little more leverage to say, obviously, the proof is in the pudding, right? And so he doesn't remember anything about the belt. When asked why he moves her car, he says because Elizabeth had seen it. When the detective asked Scott what he did with the license plate and keys, in which Scott advised they're gone, I threw it in a river. That's what he says. But he doesn't remember what river. Again, minimizing his role. And he denies his wife going over to move the car. And so he denies that Linda went over to move the car. And he advised that he had parked his truck over there and that he got into the car and moved it over to Berwick. Then he walked back to South High Apartments. And he denied anyone knowing anything. And he says he never told a single soul anything. That part, I do believe. I do believe that part. And so, there's more to come about this, but the detective asked Scott about him and Linda going over and speaking with Tindall's family. And he says that he didn't remember what they talked about. And so when the detective asked him how this has been since for him and asked him to explain to him how he has been able to function like he has, and did he hate Tindall? He says no. And he says that they did all kind of stuff together, like going out to eat, taking them shopping. And when asked why Tindall came back to his home that day due to her driving to Shelbyville, he says that Tindall wanted to go back to the house and advised that she didn't give him a reason. Okay, I'm not buying all of that. And when asked if Tindall put up a good fight, he advised that, well, a little bit. And so when asked about wrapping the belt, he says that he didn't remember. He confirms that he held Tindall until she stopped moving, until he confirmed he knew she was dead. And when he wraps Tindall up, he says that the next day, that's when he does that. And Scott advised that this was done on the office floor. And Scott, he was unsure if Alex was home during this time. Alex, is that a son? I'm not too sure on who Alex is. Is Alex the granddaughter? I mean, Alex can be a boy or female. Sorry, I don't have all those answers. But he wasn't sure if Alex was home at that time. And so Scott, he confirms that yes, he did wrap Tindall in whatever he had around there and confirmed it was black plastic. He said that he wrapped her and taped her several times and it was to get rid of her. He says that he just wrapped her up in plastic and he put her in the box that he built. And then he took the box he built into the house. He put her in the box in the house. And then he confirms that he screwed the box shut in the house. He then took a 2-wheel dolly and hauled the box across to his other property. He confirmed that the hole was already there and it was deep enough when he got there. He admitted to covering her up and confirmed that it was done with a shovel, and he confirmed it was one of his own shovels. And when asked about the other box, he says that it had been there since July, again, a month after he buried her. And when asked what Tindall was saying when this was happening, he said, "Nothing that I remember." He asked, Scott has asked if she was struggling when he was strangling her, and he said, yeah. And so he didn't say anything to her during the process, and he makes the statement to the detective, "I just knew she wasn't going to blackmail me." And we don't, again, maybe there's some truth to that. We don't know, but I don't give a flying bleep if that is true or not. That young girl did not deserve to lose her life. I struggle for any comprehension on that. And so, that's what he says. And he says that Tindall was going to tell everyone that he had his way with her, and that never happened. And he says, his plan was to kill her. And he said, or should I say, when he was asked, was his plan to kill her? He says, no, that just kind of happened. And when asked if it was because she was going to blackmail him, he says, yeah. And when he was asked if he felt good getting this off his chest, he says, I guess. That's exactly his response. And, he's asked if this bothered him that he killed Tindall, and he advised, well, I wasn't too crazy about it. You see his short, quick answers? Like, I have to give him something. I'm going to give him some lazy answer. And, of course, this interview was recorded, but now you know a lot of what is in this charging document. And she was pronounced dead upon opening that box that Tindall was located in. And they could see right away that this was something wrong. And so an autopsy was performed, and that's how we know it was her. And we continue to find out a little more, but we don't know everything. This has not been released to everyone. And so Patrick Scott, he admits to using his belt and placing it around her neck until she was gone. And then he admits to moving her body into the office where he stored her for the night. And then the next day he constructs a box and he places her into the box after wrapping it in plastic and taping it. The box was then placed in a hole at Scott's other property and then covered. And so that is what you know. And as soon as they open that box, they see the fingernails, and they knew that based on those social media photos, that was this young girl who was taken from this world way too soon. My friends, if you are a person of prayer, please pray that this family gets justice. This young girl did not deserve this. Rest in peace, Valerie Tindall. Taken from this world way too soon. My friends, if you are a person of prayer, please pray that the family gets peace and that they find justice through all of this. Right now, not only are they having to deal with a lot of pain from everyone else behind this, but they're having to deal with so much pain. My friends, if this is the type of content you like to follow, I just want to be a voice for you as well, because you have to know what could go wrong in this crazy world we live in, hopefully to be a little more alert, a little more careful. If this family knew that this Patrick Scott was aware, that was capable of doing this, they would have never done that. If you are aware, like, hey, my teenage daughter is hanging out with an adult, he seems to be friendly with the family, he seems to be great, he seems to be, he's also a boss. There's so many lines that were crossed. She was young. A boss and a child should not have a friendship, needless to say. A man and a child. I am a coach for over 45 5 kids. And let me tell you, I'm not trying to be friends with them. Do not send me a friend request on Facebook until you even graduate, because then, hey, I would like to see your future and your life and your family. And but before 18, don't even think about sending me a friend request, or I'm going to be checking out and anything. There are certain lines that should not be crossed. And I'm not blaming the family at all. They're taking a lot of heat. I'm telling you, my friends, be alert, be aware, and know this type of stuff will happen again. Unfortunately, this is the crazy freaking world we live in, right? And so, if you are a person of prayer, please pray for the family. Until then, until next time, I urge you to be alert, be careful, be aware. I'm Manny Rodriguez. This has been another episode of Deep True Crime. Until next time, my friends, have a great one. Peace.